Hello, everybody. This is James Diboe on Discovering on Liverpool Online. Former name is no longer Big Condo Online now. And this season 4 is dedicated to original people. And this is the 4th show on Discovering. And today we've got a person in. He's been on before. He's an actor. He's an author. He's a writer, a poet. He's also delved into African history, Black history. He's done it all. He's a legend from back in the day anyway. But please allow me to introduce once again Patrick Graham.
Thank you, James. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be here on Discovering to talk about whatever.
You know what? Well, you know what? We can go like 5 hours sometimes, can't we? And that, but you know, today anyway, we're concentrating on you as a writer today. We've had you on many other topics, but we're concentrating on Patrick as a writer. So let's start at the beginning of writing. Where does it begin? The writing side of things, from when you were younger, or
okay? Well, that's, I'll keep that short. You know what I mean? Because it's not as an exciting and interesting story as I would maybe like it to be, but it's still a long story because as a writer, I've always been interested in writing from a young kid, a young child, you know what I mean? In school, I always remember when you'd be given an assignment to write a story, trying to make it that interesting. I'd never ever get to finish them, you know what I mean? And, and once the lesson's gone, or 2 lessons have gone, that would be the end of it. And it wasn't something that I really had the discipline to then carry on in my own time at home. But I've always liked to tell stories, you know what I mean? And, just whether it be in the group of lads chatting banter and you come up with a little mimical or comical story about a scenario. I've always enjoyed that type of creative telling stories and making like jokes out of them in some ways. But as
you have to be creative, like the creative side of you being a writer, because I can see from you're a naturalist. So it's not just like, I just want to write. You are a great writer, first of all.
Oh, thank you.
So you're not just a writer, you're a great writer, but a great writer has to have some sort of imagination.
Well, yeah, that's it. Because, I have got a vivid imagination when it comes to writing stuff. And I've never took myself serious in that respect, you know what I mean? And I remember being on a writing course once, and one of the tutors, they said on it that there's this little silent voice in your head telling you that you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you can't do that. Because people, when you talk about anything, whether it be a footballer, a writer, an actor, unless they're in Hollywood, in the Premier League, bestseller at Waterstones, they assume, well, to be a writer, to be a footballer, to be an actor, you've got to be in that bracket. Okay. But no, because what I learned a few years ago is what's the difference between an amateur actor and a professional actor? And basically someone put it simple and says, well, one gets paid and one doesn't, but you both approach it professionally the same and give it the same dedication. I thought, wow, that's great, you know what I mean? And I've met a lot of people over the years, and I'll even be honest, I've had a great interest in writing, and one of the guys facilitating this podcast fueled a lot of that imagination, going back to some of the very first writing courses. One of the first serious, I think, writing courses I can remember going on was one writing for radio, for BBC Radio, and our host today, Chase, was on that course with me, you know what I mean? I've known him that long, and I remember getting involved in little projects that he was on in Toxteth TV, and then hearing him and seeing him and the structure and the layout and feeling of physical script in my hand, because I took part in a few short films that he made. That made me want to think, well, I can write a script as well, or I can try and write a script, but I've got the idea, I've got imagination, I need to put that to the test. But then that not believing in myself has haunted me for a long time, for a good part of 20 years almost.
What do you reckon the reason that for? I'm just interested, because your confidence has obviously grown. I mean, where was the lack of confidence from the beginning?
The lack of confidence becomes...
Because you have the knowledge there.
You can't be what you can't see.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and we're not in America, where, and even in America, there's a lot of holding back of black talent.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the same across everywhere, especially in this country, and it's not because we haven't got the talent. It's because we're not given the opportunity. Or when you're given the opportunity, you're stereotyped into what they expect you to do as a black person. So as a black person who writes, I'm expected to only write about black issues. You know what I mean? And that's not just for me, that's for everybody. And
Okay.
that's not acceptable from my point of view. As a writer, I'm expected to write what I want to write, because as a writer, I'm entitled to write what I want to write. If someone employs me to write about what's happening on, let's just say someone hires me and say, well, watch this football match and write about that, then I can't then write about theatre, because they're paying me to write about, so I have to write about that.
Yeah.
But as a writer, and I want to use my own creativity, I'm entitled to write in anything I want to write. And what I'm opposed to as well is being labelled or described as a black writer. You know, I might be a black, which, you know, that's obvious, and I'm a writer. And if I happen to write on an issue that might be from the black experience, that still doesn't make me a black writer. That makes me a writer who's writing about the black experience. And obviously, a great qualification to write about the black experience is to be black and have lived it, because you're writing about lived things that you know about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So before anyone thinks, oh, that gives a green light to every time we want to write about the black experience, we can sideline black writers and just hire white writers, because some of the black themed programs that have been on TV, you know, it'd be interesting to when people find out it's actually a white guy who's wrote that, or a team of white people who wrote that. And not to say they can't, but why don't they employ black people to write them when they're ready? But again, it goes back to that labelling thing, you know, and there's people out there, famous writers, J.K. Rowling's, you know, one of the most famous writers. I'll always use her as an example, and I always say this when I get in these conversations. When she decides to say, I'm a white writer, then you can call me a black writer. But while she's a writer, I'm a writer. You know what I mean? I haven't got her fame and whatnot, but that's irrelevant. The fact remains is we both come under the same bracket. We are both writers, and we write what we want. You know what I mean? If mine happens to have a black theme, no one should attach. Because why I say this, basically what happens is, you've heard of the term mainstream, yeah? And to me, mainstream, especially when it comes to black people, you're called a black actor, a black writer, a black director, who's trying to get into the mainstream or broke into the mainstream. So straight away, that shows two different levels. And it's actually saying, to be a black writer, a black actor, a black director, a black filmmaker, a black whatever, is less than someone who's in the mainstream. They're not as skilled, they're not as good. In other words, they shouldn't be there. So it's a term of discrimination, how I look at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, because you could be a famous writer who's black, who's made mega big movies, but you're still called a black writer. No, and when they're talking about somebody else, they just call them a writer.
Yeah.
They don't bring their colour into it, only when they're black. And for me, that's to downgrade your talent, your skill. And that's how it's used, because there's no reason to call Spike Lee a black writer when no one will call Martin Scorsese or somebody like that, or a white director or a white writer. Why would you call Spike Lee a black director but not Martin Scorsese a white director or whoever?
Yeah. This goes back to a conversation.
Or Clint Eastwood, or, you know, he's just Clint Eastwood, a director. So why shouldn't Spike Lee just be Spike Lee, a director?
We spoke on a similar topic last time, well, not the first season when you came on, and we were on the topic of the weird black history, and we were saying, because I'm looking at like Chinese, they don't say yellow history, they say Chinese history. Indian don't say brown or this history. And I think it's the same thing. It's like this thing with us where we must have an identity, which I have, but what it is like not too many people, because of the transatlantic slave trade and everything that is cut off, where we all just accept, I am a black writer, I am a black poet. But you're defining it where you are a writer. Yeah,
because it's for me to define. It's not for someone else to tell me what I am.
Yeah.
It's for me to know what I am, and for me and them to accept what I am.
Yeah.
It's not for them to define what I am, because what you will find as well is, you know, when it comes to certain organisational establishments offering opportunities for the so-called black writer, and they expect you to write only on black topics, which at the end of the day, if they claim they're sincere in opening up the industry for black people or the minorities who write, and to give them an equal footing, then they should allow them to write what they want and to accept them in as a writer who, if they want to just write, whether it be children's stories or fantasy or science fiction, then they should be allowed to write that and not be told, oh, no, it needs to be on the black experience and growing up in an inner city, in whether it be Liverpool, London, New York, South Central,
So
you know
sound
what I
like
mean, and Miami, whatever, you know, no, because there's always comes with strings attached, and that makes it wrong, because that means you're not bringing them in on an equal footage. Because when you bring in a new writer who happens to be white, you don't say, well, you now must write about your white experience, because there is no such term.
It's like
There's
they
no
don't
such
say.
term that's used.
It's like you
If they
mentioned last
happen to
time
write
about
that, then that's fair enough.
yeah.
But the term is not used, and as soon as you use that term, it creates a separate market, almost as if to say, well, that's just for them, and this is for us, and this is mainstream, which doesn't have black themes unless we want it to, and then when it does, we'll call
People
it.
can always get away with stuff when they're allowed to, though.
Well, yeah,
And they're only
that's it.
allowed to by like a lack of knowledge of majority of our people have.
You know, and for me
So it
now,
is.
I want to talk about, you know, what gives me a buzz in writing. And really, as I said, I've been writing for many years. I've tried my hands on film scripts, play scripts, you know, over the last 20 years or more. You know what I mean? I've never really took it seriously as maybe I should have. If I would have just took it that little bit more seriously, I could have done a lot more with it. And it's a question of not looking for doors to be opened for you, but to open your own doors. You know what I mean? So when I got my first children's story out, which was this one, Three Little Jamaicans English Adventure, I wrote that originally as a radio play on the same course I was talking about that I was on with Chase going back many years. And it's ironic that when we were on that course, we were the only actual two black guys on that course, and ours were the only two pieces that were written that weren't actually used on the project that we were told they were going to be used. They'd be read out on this and that. And other minority people who were there, and the main idea of the course was for black minority people to get their voice heard, and the two black people who were on the course didn't get their work heard. You know, so that's the type of nonsense that goes on. You know, the boxes are ticked to get you on the course, and then they don't actually produce your work to give you that limelight that they claimed he was going to give you. You know, that exposure, rather than, maybe limelight wasn't the right word, but that exposure, they don't give you that. You know what I mean?
Patrick, could I ask you, you done two versions of this book? Did you add pictures to one of the other ones, was it?
Yeah, the second one
The
just
second
had some
one,
illustrations in. Yeah, it's exactly the same story. There's word
Excellent.
for word. The second one just had, the reason that had no illustrations is twofold. One, it was self-published, so to get illustrations in was too costly. And secondly, for me, children especially are saturated with images all the time, from TV, from videos, from gaming. Your imagination is the best place to explore when it comes to imagery, because for every child reading it, they can create their own images. It's not forced on them by, this is the picture, that's for the story. You create your own. I remember as a child, you know, I'll admit, and I've said this in writing circles, and people think, ooh, I thought you'd I am not well read when it comes to fictional stories, children's stories. I've read stories, but not loads and loads and loads. But I still, and people say, well, you need to read to be able to write. That's it's not necessarily
I don't agree
true.
with. Yeah, I agree with
That's
what
not
you're
necessarily
saying.
true.
Yeah.
You need to be creative to be able to write.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And if you create, because what I don't want to do is to mimic someone else, because if I'm mimicking someone else, then there's no need for me to exist
That's right,
as a writer, because if I'm just copying someone else's work,
It's not original.
you know, it's not original. And if someone say, oh, that's just like such and such as well, I don't want to be just like such and such.
Yeah.
I want people to, oh, that's definitely a Patrick Graham story,
Yeah.
because that's what he writes.
All people
And
are recognising.
what I've found is I've honed my creativity over the last 2 years or more. And one of the good things that came out of this COVID pandemic for me was one, self-publishing my own book. And although I've attended writing courses, many over the years, some at university, some as modules during my university study, I attended some over the COVID period, one with a woman called Marjorie Morgan and a couple with Writing on the Wall, and they released my creativity. They said, and the facilitators that they said the right things on them courses. From all the other experiences that I'd learned over the years, they put them together for me and shaped them and released it, where I then found my hopefully found my own voice.
Okay.
And what I did find, sorry to interrupt you,
yeah.
what I did find is how I found some of that voice. There's a few things I write where I'll plot it out and say I want to do a story about A, B, or C. But one of the creative things I didn't know I had is when someone gave me a prompt, and then I would come with a story just based on that prompt, to start writing straight away and develop a story, whether it just be a short story, one page of 300-400 words, or 5,000-6,000 words.
I was going to ask you. Well, I was going to ask you about these creative writing courses, what you've done in the past. I understand it helped you, but what I'm saying is you had the gift anyway, naturally. Do you think them courses make a difference to help someone be a writer?
Difference, because it's like a coach. Yeah?
Okay,
you could have a coach who's
a
a football coach, but ain't a great footballer. You could have a boxing coach who ain't a great boxer, or was never a great boxer, but can coach you to be that great boxer, to be that world champion. And all these different people over the years, because nobody's right and nobody's wrong. Because what I've found is one person will say, this is how you structure a story, this is how you do this, you must follow this rule. Another person will say something different. And all these people have been relatively successful and very successful at what they're doing, but they're all saying something slightly different. So clearly, they're all right. They're not all wrong, because they're all being successful at what they're doing, but they're telling you different things. So for me, it's not about just listening to him or her or her or him. It's about taking what suits me from what they say and moulding my own piece.
Yeah.
So rather than a jigsaw puzzle where when you put it together, it will always have the same picture, I look at it more like plasticine. We're both given the same amount of lumps, but then we can create what we want from them lumps.
So what about a person, who has no creativity, and he's given the training to be able to write creatively? Would that help him?
Well,
or is it about having a natural
I will try
gift?
and answer that, because I haven't got all the answers. And
I mean, just briefly,
using the term someone with no creativity, then that straight away would think, well, you've got no creativity.
Because you have people who have books with no creativity.
What I wouldn't say is, I wouldn't say they've got no creativity. What I would say is someone would help them to tap into what their creative sources are. They might not recognise that creativity.
Wow.
Yeah? But so that writing coach can help them tap into what is that creativity. So as much as they might be teaching you to write a full-scale novel, it might turn out that when they tap into your creativity, you're best suited to writing short stories, or they might be teaching about short stories or this and that, and then it suddenly you find a knack to write longer stories, or to write children's stories or children's picture book stories. There's so many different branches to creativity, because creativity can be like a tree.
Well, I'm looking at just say rap music, for example, because you can come with a lot of lyrics when you do rap music. I mean, there's all sorts of music, but I'm concentrating rap because of how many bars are in this. And so if somebody is not a creative artist as a musician, from the era that, well, I go back, especially you go back, we come from the era of good musicians. So what we've seen as the years have gone by, it's become more of a business. We can see that, and business sometimes takes over. But there's a lot of people there who make it, but to me, I don't believe that they deserve to make it. But at the same time, it's still good to see someone made it off the street or made it to do better than the life. But music is a funny one, because the business side of it. Now, the business side of books, because you probably more than me, is like you said before about an expectation. Is there an expectation of a writer to call it, you're the black writer, where everyone else is just a writer? If you get
me. Well, that's how I answered that before. You know what I mean? There's that type of thing. You know what I mean?
Because people expect us to rap, but you don't expect us all to write books.
You know what I mean? The expectation of that, in school, you're expected to be an athlete, but you're not expected to be a doctor or a solicitor or, a scientist or this. You just expect, you're a great athlete, and they will push you down that road, but they won't push you even though they know you're great at English, or you're great at maths, you're great at physics. They don't say, you should try and be a teacher or a physics teacher. Because I remember in one of the years in school, I got the highest marks for my physics folder. You know what I mean? But no one ever encouraged me to pursue physics in any way, shape, or form ever, or English. You know what I mean? I got the highest grade. when I done my English exam, not the highest grade in the school, I mean the highest grade that you could get, you know what I mean? But no one encouraged me to be a writer. But I remember the experiences, one teacher who's passed away now, some of the reading lessons he used to do, that was one of my influences. I didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight, I've realised that, and even going back to junior school, one of the teachers who used to, when it was reading time and they would pick different kids to read a page or a paragraph, I used to love having a chance to read and trying to mimic the way the teacher would do the different voices and the different tones, the way they would, talk something and then speed the voice up to add that excitement, which then fed the imagination so you could picture what they were reading, because there wasn't images in these books. So what I wanted to do is just give you a little tiny example, because when I say I'm a writer, my writing over the last year or more has actually, when I say surprised me, it surprised me, because I've written things that I thought, wow, where did that come from? Based off a prompt. Someone gave me a word or a sentence or a picture and said, write, and I've started writing something. And I've gone away and polished it later, you know what I mean? But when I've read it back in the class, I've had some great feedback. And as a writer, me personally, and I know it's from a lot of people from conversations, you're your own worst critic. And I used to not hate my writing, but dislike it and think, oh, that's no good. I used to say the same thing about my poetry, oh, that's no good. And, could be there for years and no one's heard it. And then when someone does hear it, oh, that's great, that. And I'd be like thinking, you're just saying that.
You know what, you're
humble.
humble.
Strangers who were saying that to me as well, who've heard it when I've read it out. So that's why I'm saying, I've held myself back. I've had that lack of confidence. I haven't believed in myself.
But also you're humble as well,
of something that I've done. Yeah. Go on, say what you're going to say.
I'm saying I find you very humble, and I don't believe it's. I mean, you might say, well, you might not see yourself as this, but and you've surprised yourself. You said lately, but when I'm reading anything what you've done, some of the articles you've done, and this is a creative mind. What I'm reading, Anyway, continue what you were saying. I'm just finding
no, it is. It's hard because at the end of the day, as a writer, you want to write, you want to share your work. If you want to make a living from it, that's another different argument again. And I'm not going to sit here and try and tell people that, yeah, I do love writing and I do just want to write. But you've also, life is life. You've got to be able to, and sometimes afford to write. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is if you want to write novels and this and that and dedicate hours and hours a day, then unless you've got income coming in that from that employment is stress-free, where it allows you the comfort and the luxury to write, then you can do that. If you haven't and you're in a job, unfortunately at the moment, I'm in a job where it's about writing and being actually paid to write.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, that's a dream come true. Somebody's paying me to write. Someone wants to throw, at some stage, J.K. Rowling's type of earnings at me. You'd be a fool to say no, but I'm not in it for that. I'm in it to be able to write. And if I can make a living off it and pay me way and pay me bills, then to me that's great. Everything above and beyond that is a bonus. But ultimately, I just want to write.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to do things where it doesn't involve writing. And at the moment, I've been fortunate for the last 6 months to, writing for the local newspaper in Liverpool. And, I'm able to write every day almost. So to me, that's great. And I can still... It's more difficult, but I'm still trying to find the time to write my own personal stuff, my stories, because I'm someone. People say, "Oh, when you're writing or you're this or that, you need to focus on this," and maybe they're right. You know what I mean? I haven't got all the answers. I'm not going to try and get all the answers. However, I always describe myself like an unsupervised 5-year-old in a sweet shop with £20. You know what I mean? Where I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. And when it comes to writing, I want to write a novel, I want to write a children's story, I want to write a short story, I want to write history stories, I want to write everything. And
I don't think there's any rules to it, though.
Well,
I mean,
to me, that's exactly unless the words out of my mouth. There's no rules.
I'm more relate to how you've said that, because some people think everything has to be structured a particular way. Now, depending on what it is, but as a writer, you could be writing from this to this to this, many different things you're writing about. You're creative, so your mind's not just thinking of one thing.
But as I said, I don't want to mimic anyone else when you say, because on a writing course, they'll all tell you need to find your own voice. So if my voice happens to have different tones and different sounds, and I translate that to mean different types of stories and different types of writing, then that's my voice. So, it might be, to some people seem scatty, but for me it seems to work, because at the moment I'm writing or working on a full-scale novel. Well, two full-scale stories. One is about a man called Egypt. It's called Egypt, This Is History, or This Is His Story. It's got two S's in it.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm also writing a children's story called, it's got a working title at the moment. The title will change, but at the moment it's just called Aziza and Great Zimbabwe, which is about a mythical creature called an Aziza, which, you know, an English equivalent would be a fairy.
Is this going to be a new book out before I just...
Yeah, these are things I'm working on. I couldn't say when they're going to be completed.
So let's just go back a sec. What's the first book you're bringing out?
No, it's not a question of which one's the first. These are what I'm working on simultaneously.
Tell me again. Just repeat it, please.
At the moment, I'm working on an anthology of short stories, which short stories about anything and everything.
Okay.
Yeah, based mainly on prompts. I'm going to read one or two out in a minute. I'm working on a fictional biography, which is based on real history and events, called Egypt, This Is His Story. But the way when you look at it, it looks like Egypt, This Is History, but you realise when you look properly, there's two S's in it. So it's Egypt, This Is His Story.
His story, yeah.
So, and I'm working on a book called, children's book. That's an adult book. When I say adults, anyone from 13 upwards could read it. I'm working on a children's book which is aimed at 7 to 11 is the main age group it's aimed at, but obviously an adult would enjoy reading it with a child as well, called Aziza and Great Zimbabwe. And I'm also working on a series of short stories. The shortest one is about 230 words, and at the moment the longest one is about 6,000 words, and everything else in between. And that again would be aimed at anyone 13, 14 plus. I want to give you an example. This is one of this is the first prompt, or one of the first prompts rather, that I was given at one of my writing courses.
Yeah.
And after doing a couple more, that's what made me think, wow, there's something in me where someone's given me a prompt, a photograph. This was based on a photograph. Sometimes it's just a word, and then I've wrote something, and I thought, where did that come from? I don't know. I've just started writing. Sometimes I've used the first line they give me. You know what I mean? You know, so if the prompt was in one of them, I looked down the line. Sorry, the prompt was, I looked down the line and I wondered, yeah? And that's a short story or a piece of prose that is in an anthology that was produced by Writing on the Wall. And I used that as the opening line. And then what came from me, I didn't have a clue what I was going to write. They just gave me that and I just started writing. So I'm going to read that to you now and just show you what developed. And to me, this amazed me because I went, well, why did I write that? I don't know. Because as soon as I gave the prompt, I started writing. So I didn't have no idea what it was going to be. I just kept writing and didn't stop typing until I got so far. And I thought, well, that's the end.
Okay.
And then I went over it and, you know, tidied it up, so to speak. Spelling, grammar, whatever, made it flow a bit better. But ultimately, this is what it was called. I looked down the line and I wondered. It goes like this, not very long. It goes like this. I looked down the line and I wondered how quick the line would move today. Yesterday and the whole week before were not good days for some, as despite the best efforts of the Black Panther Party's food programme, they were not able to feed everyone. People went hungry, men, women, and worst of all, the children. I could hear the pain of the mothers and fathers as they walked away, trying the best to explain to 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, teenagers, twins, brothers and sisters that they were not going to eat that evening. Many of the faces were etched deeply with the lines and marks of worry, which were once beautiful, pious and graceful-looking, learned faces, now reduced to a look of hopelessness, mixed with a small amount of hope. That hope was what kept them going each day, kept them going each morning, just enough to know that they had to do better, that they had to find a way out, that they must find a way out of having to stand in this line each day. But in order to do that, they would need to be able to find work. We all know that due to segregation having only ended on paper, in practice we were still denied the dignity of being able to work and earn a decent enough living to allow us to survive. Right now all we did was exist. The thought of survival seemed somewhat a luxury. And to live, well, that was part of the American dream, which we all knew too well was a living nightmare for black folks. If you were fortunate enough to have that dream, there was always the downside and the terrible reality of having to wake up in the morning to face the cold, stark reality of life in Oakland, where few had jobs with an income worthy of our humanity. Segregation had ended some 5 years past. It was 4 years since Malcolm was murdered, and a year to the day that they murdered Martin. However, today things were looking up, as although we were last in the line, there seemed to be enough food for everyone. So at least we knew that we were going to have a good meal to look forward to. We knew that we knew, and we never forgot, that it had been a long struggle, and there'd been many a year of struggle before we could not only taste good food, but truly taste freedom. One day, there'll be one death too many, and black people will say enough is enough. And I will welcome that day. I hope that if not I, then my children will live to see it happen. It could be tomorrow, it could be next week or next year. Maybe we'll have to wait over 50 years, but that day will come.
Yep.
And that was just written off a prompt.
Okay.
You know, I don't know why I decided to take that theme. You know, it's something that is part of my psyche. But let me just give you another totally different example written. And this was a photograph of a brick building, like a dome building, with like what looked like a long chimney type building, both brick. There was two domes and one chimney, and we were told it was at the edge of the water, and that's all we was given, that picture. So based on that picture, I just started typing, and I came up with this. I gave it a title, but afterwards I'll tell you the title at the end. Initially, I thought I was dreaming of the sea, as I've not long got back from a holiday where I'd spent every day sat on a beach, sipping cocktails and hoping I could stay there forever, while the sea drowned out the noise of children and the families. However, I now realise that I was not lying atop a towel on sand that's dry and ever so warm, with a little shade covering me and the hot sun baking the exposed parts of my body. Instead, I'm damp and cold, as if I've been lying on wet grass for hours on end. I sit up and look around, and in the twilight, I see that not only I am actually lying on wet grass, I really can hear the sea and the waves bouncing about somewhere close by. They sound just as if they did in my dream, even if it was a dream. Looking up, I see some strange buildings that I don't recognise, all at the same time they remind me of pictures I've seen of ancient Roman ruins. I stand, pick up my backpack and slowly walk towards them. My feet sink slightly with each step. Some of the structures appear to be circular type buildings flanked by two taller towers that look like old factory chimneys that I've seen being demolished on TV, although they're much smaller than the industrial ones. Approaching the circular building to my right, I notice that it has many arched doorway-like openings, but if there were ever any actual doors in them, they have long since disappeared. I guess that if these openings are the same distance apart, there would be maybe 9 or 10 of them. As I get up close to the nearest one, the ground under my feet feels a little firmer. Unsure of my next move, I peep inside, but it's difficult to see much of anything as the night draws in. My eyes begin to adjust as the dying sunlight makes shadows within the small patches of light, when suddenly a voice cries out, "Please stop it," it begs. "No more, please. Why are you doing this to me? Please stop it now. Why'd you stand there staring at me? Answer me." Poking my head inside, there appears to be no one there. Is this voice talking to me? I think. If so, why can't I see them if they can see me? Fear ripples through every fibre of my body like waves lapping on the shoreline. I take a deep breath and step inside, and to my surprise, I can see much more clearly now. There is a polished wooden floor beneath my feet, a bar at the far side, and four or five tables. Strangely, I cannot see any of the other openings that I counted earlier, or any sign of the owner of the terrified voice that had called out. Also, the room appears to be square-shaped, despite its circular domed roof exterior. There are closed floral pattern curtains hanging from the wall, reminding me of my grandmother's house when I was a child. "Later on, he will be scared," another voice, this time of a child, says menacingly. As I turn to see who spoke, I feel a whack against the back of my head. Everything goes silent and then dark. And that's the end.
Yeah.
You know, and that story is called The Strangest Ruins, and it's actually part of a series of stories which are actually unrelated but are related. And, you know, that makes sense to me, even if people listening say, well, how could it be unrelated and related in the same move? But the titles, you know, the second one of these was called The Strangest View, which when I wrote it, again, it was based on a prompt of a picture. And when I wrote it, it was never meant to be connected to this. It was just as I got near to what was going to be the end of the story, suddenly I thought it could be connected in some way. And then I wrote a much longer one called The Strangest Days, which is about 3,500 words. But this one is about 400 or 500 words. The second one is about 800.
Okay.
So these are just examples, from the Three Little Jamaicans. So anyone who's read that, or hopefully will go out and buy that, it's available on Amazon, News from Nowhere Bookshop, and Liverpool Museum, Acoma Arts, and a few other places.
Yep.
But they're all different types of things. From the first one I read about Oakland and the Black Panther Party's food program to
now something 3, 2, 1. Yeah. So anyway, very interesting things we've been talking about. Now, something that was very interesting to myself, and I appreciate very much a story that you wrote about myself with the indigenous travels and world travelers. And if I could get what you done also, you opened my own mind on how big this is. What was the reason you wanted to do a story on for myself?
Well, I write for the newspaper, and one of the things, when you're writing on community issues is to be able to tell community stories. So for me, I write what I feel was not just what I feel is interesting, but I feel that people within the community and wider community as well will also find interesting.
Yeah.
So somebody who's 40 years old, who's travelled to, at the time that we wrote it, in 13 years, had travelled to almost 30 countries. To me, that's on its own is interesting, because it's not just that you've travelled to Ibiza, to Cyprus, to Tenerife, to Barcelona, to Paris. You've travelled to places off the beaten track, so he wasn't travelling to the tourist places.
Yeah.
And even if he was seen as a tourist country, you know what I mean, the places that you would go to them were not the tourist sites. Most tourists don't think of that. Even your average backpacker who's quite adventurous doesn't go as far as you went. So to me, that's definitely interesting. You know what I mean? And people would want to hear that story and would be interested in the many places you've travelled, the reasons for motivating you for travelling, and obviously what you experienced when you were there. So for me, as much as you try to condense all that into an article in a paper, it's a massive story out there. It's a massive story.
And then after that conversation, after that, I remember the conversation we had after the story, which I really appreciated, was, you said to me you might be able to do a book for me in the future.
You'd asked, I said, you could. There is a book in your travels, because, you've been to so many countries, you've met so many different, diverse people, and on these travels, interesting people, interesting places, interesting stories that they've told you about, their time in that place or how they arrived at that place in some cases, and people wouldn't even realise that they lived there. Black people who were living in certain places where people didn't realise they actually had a black population. So all these things are of interest. You know what I mean?
That's
and for
why
me to put that into a book and to go into more detail for there's people out there who would be interested in that. Travel is a massive industry.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's a massive industry.
And as a black person travelling as well, it's I know travelling, it opens up everyone's mind. But when as black person travelling, the barriers that we face wherever we go, I mean, I've had my own barriers. When I'm looking for some of these peoples and I'm speaking to the local people, I've had some real negative responses. Some responses people didn't know they were. Then there's response where, oh, why do you want to go and see them people?
Just to leave it at that. That's all makes for an interesting write.
Well, that's the whole point
book,
of it.
You know what I mean? Interesting write in a book, but just
another story anyway.
That would be different from what I'm used to writing, because I'm used to writing off prompts. However, it wouldn't be so much. That would just be an extension of, my journalism role, because you're now writing a whole story which is not confined to any sizes. You're just writing where you're writing until it's finished.
Abraham O'Japa's story as well, very interesting. The vegan.
They're all interesting stories.
All
just talking about what I was mentioning before about some of these short stories and prompts and writing a children's book at the moment, which, it could be anything. At the moment, I think I'm, only 10,000 words in, but I'm a fraction of the way into the book. So when it's finished, in my mind, it could be anything from 30, 40,000 up to 60, 70,000 words. I just can't really say.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of them stories where I didn't expect it to be that long, but the pace it started off, it'll be as long as it needs to be. It's finished when it's finished. You know what I mean?
I would prefer you someone like yourself to. I mean, I could write my own. Some people say why you write, but I'd rather. I like the way you write. That's the whole point.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Appreciate the compliment because I've tried my hands at all sorts. I'm still interested in writing film scripts. You know what I mean? I still do try my hand, and I've upgraded. One thing that I did make into like a TV film script, however you want to call it, screenplay, was a play that I wrote initially. Going back just over 10 years, well, in fact, over 10 years, it's like 2008, that's like almost 14 years ago now. I wrote that during the City of Culture year, which was a play that I wrote, which was called My Mother's Children Don't Like Me, which the title was inspired by people from the Caribbean who came to the UK during World War II to either directly be part of the war effort or to help out in the war effort. So it's, without giving too much away about the story, it's based on two Jamaicans and two Guyanese, a Jamaican brother and sister. The brother joins the RAF, and the sister comes over as a nurse to help out in the war efforts. With the obvious wounded that those wars create, and a teacher from Guyana and one of his pupils who, not soon after leaving, joins the British Armed Forces, and so does the teacher, and it follows their life in the army.
In Guyana?
No, in the British Armed Forces.
Yeah, but you say...
That's where they're from.
Oh, yeah.
It traces their story, to fighting in North Africa, to settling in the UK. And I turned that into a screenplay. It's the same story, but written, different formats, from a theatrical performance to a screenplay, the way it's laid out. So I hope I've done a good job of it, and I hope that one day that could be realised, you know what I mean?
Would you ever write a magazine?
Well, when you say write for a magazine, it's...
No, your own. Could you write your own magazine?
Do I write my own magazine?
No. Have you ever thought about it?
Well, no, because one, it would be, a magazine about what? What would the theme be? What would the themes be?
Whatever you want it to be. Whatever you want to be.
I've thought about it, and it's nothing. At the moment, all I want to do is write books. Storybooks. Storybooks, from children's picture books to children's stories to adult stories to short stories. That's all I want to write. You know what I mean? That's what I am writing, because there's no point stopping.
I remember the last time I interviewed you on here, I asked you about, would you ever be interested in doing an audio book?
Well, yeah, because some of my short stories, because I want to mention this, some of my short stories, I think there's at least 3 of them where I've read them myself, recorded them, and I've put them on my YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to hear them, they can visit Patrick Graham at Blackout Productions, and it's Patrick Graham at Blackout Productions. And when I say at, that's spelled A-T, it's not the at sign. People might be wondering, well, why not use the at sign? Well, this goes back to what I was saying. I write what I want to write.
Well, I'm subscribed
I
to your
don't want to
channel.
write the at sign. I want to write A-T.
Yeah.
Patrick Graham at Blackout Productions. That's the name of my YouTube channel. And on there, in one of the playlists, you'll find 3 short stories. One called Who Knows. One called There Was a Heavy Mist This Morning, and the other one is called A Funny Thing Happened Today. And the 3 totally unrelated stories, you can listen to them, so effectively they are audio books. So yeah, it's something I would do. I enjoyed reading them out. Check them out, have a listen, put some comments on there, like my page, subscribe and follow me.
I've listened to, I'm subscribed to your channel. You talking about your YouTube channel? Yeah, I'm subscribed. I've heard like a lot of poems. I've seen the one where you were talking about African history also. There's a lot of things that you can write. That's why I'll ask you about audiobook magazines, because in my own mind, I can see all of that.
Well, as a writer, it gives you that flexibility to be all them things. But because, as I said, I don't want to be boxed into, this is the guy who just writes short stories, this is the guy who just writes novels, this is the guy who just writes picture books. As much as people might advise, find this and find that and focus on it.
Okay, can I just say,
I'm focused on them all.
I'm looking at you as an individual now. I'm not interested in other writers as I'm speaking now. I'm saying the potential I see in you, and I'm not talking about other writers, there's many areas I can see you covering anyway. Because of your creativity, you know, your mind is everywhere. I see you doing about 100 things at once in one day sometimes. So these things I'm looking at as an individual. I'm not looking at other writers. And as yourself, like I see, there's so much potential, passion, imagination, creativity. You could just go on forever. So that's why I thought, well, it's like Patrick can do anything.
Well, I hope that. I hope that's true. You know what I mean? And
you know,
I'm flattered with the compliments.
put that pen in your hand,
me,
and you know.
For me, you know, writing is something which, like with anything people do, you need to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, then stop doing it. Whatever that is, stop doing it. If you're not enjoying it, then stop doing it. You know, unfortunately, there's people out there who are in jobs where it pays the wage, it pays the mortgage, it puts food on the table, which they may not enjoy, so they just have to do it. I'm fortunate where I said I'm in a job which is paying me to write, and then outside of that, I still can do my own creative writing.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and you know, and come up with things. You know, I send off to publishers and so on. You know, I was before Christmas, I was offered a publishing contract, which unfortunately I did turn it down because it wasn't right for me. And that's because it required, you know, me to put up X amount of money as part of, you know, the publishing fees, which I didn't have. And even if I did have, I thought it wouldn't be worth the risk because, you know, if I just say it just flops. Like, if someone believes my writing is great and they want to publish it, then go ahead and do that. You know what I mean?
I think it's something what you said earlier.
That's what publishers supposed to be there to do.
Opportunity, like you mentioned earlier, and I think this because a lot of talented people can be held back due to that. You know.
Well, yeah, because you know, and for me, you know, I like to say, you know, I remember walking into someone's office and say, I want to write a book on poetry. They said, well, have you done this? Have you done that? And I said, well, no. And they said, well, you need to do this. You need to do that first, or try this. And I said, well, I don't want to try that. I want to do it my way.
Yeah.
Different. And funny enough, they liked that. And then before they know it, they said, well, okay, come along and do, you know, a little shadowing someone. And before they knew it, they were paying me to do workshops.
Okay.
Because simply because of that, I don't want to do it like it's not like I wanted to take a shortcut.
No, you do.
But I just thought, well, I know I feel I can do this, so I want to do it. Why do I need to do these things? Yeah, they are good things, and you know, but what's stopping me doing it this way? And they actually liked that and gave me the opportunity and thought, wow, okay, this
think
is
out
good.
the box and stuff.
And, you know, I was able to relate to the children, that the schools that I was going into, and you know, I had a great rapport with them and brought a lot of creativity out of them. So for me, it's not about, you know, I remember when I was at university, you know, some of the things, a few of the things stuck in my head that people like, you know, I was fortunate enough to have a workshop with Willie Russell while we was at university. You know, he was a famed Liverpool writer, you know, wrote the play Blood Brothers amongst many others. But, you know, that term, afford to write, I remember he said, it might not have used them exact words, but he said something along them lines. He's in a position where he can, you know, go away and rent a villa somewhere and stay there for 2 weeks and write. You know what I mean? And that's great, but everyone's not as fortunate as that, you know what I mean? And even down to scribbling notes and not doing with them, or starting something and never finishing it and having a cupboard full of them. I thought I had loads of folders and still got them. And most of that stuff was still never being progressed that are in the house. But when I heard him say he does stuff like that and he has folders and cabinets full, I thought, wow, okay, well, that's not all too bad, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with that, because I was thinking, you're never going to be a writer because you're just writing these ideas and that's all they ever remain as ideas. But outside of that, I'm still then taking on other projects and writing them and seeing them.
Because another thing, like, I like how you put that before, because I remember years ago when I'd just be writing bars of lyrics, just pure pages. I used to just write of like different rhymes and stuff like that. But it was just doing it because I want to do it. It's not like, well, it's like when someone interferes with something that you like, you have passion, and they say, well, can you do it this way? I like constructive criticism, but if it's there to take away your creativity by adding what they want in, then I don't see the point of it.
Well, no, it isn't. Yeah, you've got to be. Yeah. It's got to be a two-way thing. And as you said, constructive criticism.
I don't mind it, but saying, feel like, you know,
do it this way, you need to say why and why it should be better. Yeah. And rather than saying do it this way, try it that way. maybe more the way, because that's what I've had when I've been mentored by some writers, and they said things, well, why don't you try this, or why don't you try that? It doesn't mean you have to, but it's just advice, and see how it works, and see what suits you, what fits you. You know what I mean? Because it's a question of, when you're writing, as I said before, write what you like. You know what I mean? And if you're writing because you want to be the next blockbuster, that's great, but you might not be. But if you are, you've still wrote what you want, what you like.
So what's the?
It's hard to write what someone else wants.
Yeah.
And to be that.
That question.
J.K. Rowling, when she wrote her Harry Potter stories, she wrote them because that's what she wanted to write, and she wrote them. And now the more than world famous.
See, working for the papers now. Yeah. I was asking you before, we didn't really get into it, about the restrictions on what you can write, how it's structured, but how would you say it is now with the work you're doing?
Well, I wouldn't even use the word restrictions. Anyone who works for a newspaper, the idea is to find stories and write about them.
That you like, though?
There is no restrictions in that sense. It's what people are interested in, you find and you write about it.
Okay.
So it's not a question of restrictions.
Yeah.
It's a question of find things that people want to read.
Ah, right. Okay.
That's a diverse of all sorts of things that people want to read, because if everyone read the same thing, it would be quite a boring world.
Yeah.
So it's not about restrictions. It's about being creative and writing what people want to read and write it creatively.
Well, that's good. I'd like the sound of that.
So, just I'm not here to advise people as such, but I will just put out a word of advice just to follow on from what I said before. If you enjoy writing, keep writing. Don't think, what will other people think about it? Think what you think about it first, because if you don't like it, then why should anybody else like it? And that's the barrier I got over with my writing. If I don't like it, why should anyone else like it? And it's not, I found my writing, especially after the last courses, I could see the improvement myself. I could hear the improvement, because, again, it's not someone telling you how to do it. It's someone coaching what I hope is already within me, and they've just brought that out. Just like the examples I gave before about the boxing coach, who may never even have been a boxer, or was a boxer but was, never great, had 10 fights and got battered in 10 seconds in all of them, but knows what to tell you to become that great fighter. You know what I mean? And that's the same with a lot of things, from ballet to football to art to boxing to writing to acting. Some of the greatest directors, well, no good actors themselves, but they can make someone else a damn good actor.
Yeah.
But that person, rather than use the term they're not creative, they've already got these creative things in them. They've just brought that out of them, or give them ways in order to find what's good in them.
That's interesting. I like the sound of that. Now, not every coach can do that, but the coaches you're talking about, they have to have some creativity and knowledge themselves to be able to help you tap into something.
Well, yeah, because that's what makes them, that's why they're able to put on writing courses. You know what I mean? That's why they're able to put on drama classes. That's why they're able to put on film studies. That's why, as I mentioned before, Chase, when I first met Chase, he was he's still into films and writing and this and that. And that gave me when he explained how certain things work, I thought, well, okay, I feel I'm skilled enough. I can do that. I can try that. And that's one of the catalysts, on top of some of the earlier catalysts, that it all adds up to me. It's all them things I've moulded together over the years.
Have you been involved in
took the best of whatever someone's told me, what I think works for me.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
Have you been involved with it? I'm sure you'd have writing for a movie or a series. Was you writing anything to do with levels? Was that wrong to say?
No, I was in Levels. I acted in Levels, but I didn't actually write for them or anything.
Because I can imagine you also to be a person to write for the movie and stuff.
Well, I said I have tried my hand at it, and it's something I will go back to. There's a script that I had started many moons ago, and I've never touched it in many moons, and I will go back to it. And why I will go back to it, because I remember someone telling me, what was the film? Oliver Stone, not Oliver Stone, is it the Vietnam film? It's not Full Metal Jacket. What's the other one?
Oh, I'm
Platoon. Yeah, Platoon. that film, I believe that was before that became a big hit, box office hit. It was wrote something like 14 years prior. You know what I mean? And at the time it was wrote, I think it was too soon after the Vietnam War. So it was a bit too sensitive politically and this and that. But 14, and so I thought, well, from that point of view, I don't want to wait 14 years to get a movie that's a hit, a script. But I just thought, you know, I've got stuff that's old. As I mentioned, my first story I did self-publish it. Myself, it's still out there, it's still available, The Three Little Jamaicans. That was wrote 15 years prior as a radio
What was your
play.
reason there? Because this is important for the audience, this as well. What was you see when you said you self-publish, yeah? Because there's different ways people can bring your book out, isn't it? How it's sold.
Yeah, well, ideally, if you want your book published, ideally, a publisher, a big publisher,
yeah,
you know, well-known publisher, Penguin, Hatchet.
but independent though,
Faber.
like independent.
Yeah, they come, they say this is a great story, and they do everything. They promote it, they, you know, help you edit it, this, that, design it, get you an illustrator. They publish it and market it nationally, within Europe, within the world, have it translated. That's the ideal thing for any writer. You know, me would feel honoured and blessed to have that done to something that they'd created, for a big publisher to come along and share it with the world. When you self-publish, you know, you still got the potential to share it with the world, but you're limited on how you can promote it and how you can publicise it and who you're connected to and who you're not connected to, and can you get it into the mainstream big bookshops, as they say. You know what I mean? That word mainstream again, you know what I mean? Which is that barrier to everybody. But, you know, they have them connections, they have that establishment, you know, because it's a big known publisher, a bookshop, a big bookshop, well-known bookshop is more likely to take it than if I approach them as Patrick Graham. Well, who are you?
If I can pop off one last question, Patrick. See, you mentioned before about the story about writing about Egypt with his story. Now, say you're writing a book about history, like what would you see the approach to write a book about history rather than a book about whether it's the Three Jamaicans or
Well, to be honest, if you're writing a book about anything,
okay. A certain approach.
You're not right. If you're writing a book about anything, look at it like I've just opened a recipe book. You've got to follow these instructions in the recipe in order to make this cake or this whatever.
Follow the
order,
chronological.
So if you're writing a book about anything, you have to have a structure to that. Where's the beginning? Where's the middle? Where's the end? What happens in between? Is there a twist? Is there a sub-story? Is there this? Is there that? You need to know or have an idea of these things in your head. And then, you know, different from writing a prompt, you know, you don't write a novel, a whole novel off a prompt where you just start writing and this and that. Where the character and the idea to write the Egypt, this is his story, was based on a workshop again, where you had to just design a character. You had to give them a name, how old they were, a turning point in their life several years later, what the grandfather's name is, what the parents' names are, the grandparents' names are, what school they went to, did they have a best friend, what was the favourite colour, the favourite meal, did they have a favourite teacher? You have to create all these things in this character, and when I created all them, that's what gave me the idea to then write, I want to do a story about this character. I really like this character.
Excellent.
You know what I mean? From down to the day he was born,
Yeah.
what it coincided with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, what his birthday coincided with, you know, an historical discovery. I wanted to write about this character, so that's what gave me the fuel to write. And unfortunately, this story that I'm talking about today, me and writing, you know, some of the things I've said about I want to write like this, don't call me a black writer, I'm a writer. Some people might think, oh, that's arrogant, that's this and that. No, it's not. That's me. And I'm entitled to define myself. No one's entitled to define me. I'm entitled to define myself, you know what I mean? If I want to say I'm a writer, then that's what you have to call me. Don't then add a label on to, oh yeah, well, this guy, he's a black writer. No, he isn't, he's a writer.
Yeah,
Because
interesting
said,
anyway.
When you label famous white writers as white writers, you might write a story with no other characters in but white people, they're not called white writers. So if I write a story, whether it's all black people or not, I am not going to be labelled.
We're coming to the end of the
and
show now.
I will challenge anyone who tries to label me that. You know what I mean? If I use that term, I will then put it in context. You know what I mean? And with all what I've said. So at the end of the day, I am who I am. Yeah. And that's
Graham.
me. And that's for me to define myself. And, you know, this story for today has to come to an end.
Unfortunately, but I've really enjoyed this conversation, and you're an excellent writer, man, and I hope soon that you do a book for myself, and I ain't got the title for it, but hopefully you squeeze in some time, and I know your time is precious, and...
Well, yeah, I hope I can, you know what I mean? I hope I can write as much as I can write, you know what I mean? Because there's only so much you can do, but I want to write as many things and as often and as regular as I can. And having this conversation, it just, spurs me on to do that even more. To one day getting round to writing your book, your story,
I'm looking forward to that, definitely.
Because mine's not as interesting, I don't think, but I can write about imagination, reality,
powerful
fiction,
imagination,
surreal.
And also where
just in me.
As we're then out, this season 4 is dedicated to original people, and we basically kept this topic today for writing. That's what this whole topic's about today, and just the dedication. Like Patrick, the whole point of the story with mine, it's all dedicated to original people, and this is what we're trying to do anyway. And I want to really thank you anyway, Patrick Graham, and definitely we'll do this again, definitely.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, when one of these books or stories that I've mentioned that I'm working on, whether it be the children's novel, this Egypt story, or the anthology of my own short stories, when they're finally put in together, I wouldn't mind coming back and talking about them. If they have any, whether I have any success or self-published them myself, or I've just completed them. I'd love to come back and talk. It's always a pleasure to come in. Thank you to Liverpool Online for hosting us. It's always a pleasure to be here. Our host Chase over there, who's off camera, but
okay, we're gonna finish. We're gonna end it out now anyway. Season 4, Discovering with James Diboe, guest Patrick Graham, creative writer and dedicated to original people, and we out of here.